Produced and distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C., this is your NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, artists, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about the show at our website, stash.norml.org, and continue the education and conversation on our blog as well. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. The podcasting and blogging technology for the NORML Daily Audio Stash is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. Visit www.redaphid.com. It's Tuesday, May 13th, and it's 4:20 somewhere in the world. I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville. We here at NORML would like to remind you to get involved in the cannabis civil rights movement and join us here at NORML. You can learn everything you need to know at NORML.org. Make a donation, write a letter, attend a march. It all starts with you. Call your Congress at 202-224-3121. They'll ask your zip code and put you in touch with your elected officials. Tell them to support H.R. 5842 and H.R. 5843 to end DEA raids in medical marijuana states and to legalize personal possession of pot. It still is a government of we the people, but you have to step up and do your part. Today is Government at Work Day on the podcast, and coming up after the news, we're going to speak with Dan Lin of Illinois NORML. A medical marijuana bill in the Illinois legislature has recently been amended to address the concerns of law enforcement, and Dan joins us to break down the latest changes. After that, Cannabis Carry brings us Rocker T from Oakland, California. His song, True Ganja Man, is an excellent hybrid of dancehall and reggae that will get your toes tapping and your feet moving. Irie. We'll wrap up today with the latest scary report about how heavy marijuana use could lead to an increased risk of stroke and heart attack. Bruce Merkin from Marijuana Policy Project joins us to rebut the findings and to ask one simple question. Where are the bodies? There's plenty to talk about, so sit back and relax with your favorite strain. This is your NORML Daily Audio Stash. Now it's time to take a look at the latest stories about marijuana from news organizations across America and around the world in our NORML Daily Audio Stash, Hemp Headlines. Authorities to courthouses visitors. Leave drugs at home. I will never say that smoking marijuana makes you stupid. However, some stupid people do smoke marijuana. You'd think most people wouldn't need to be told that you shouldn't bring your stash to a courtroom, but then again, this is a country where we have to place dramatization disclaimers on flying cars and TV ads so people won't sue when their new ride won't fly. It's only an added bonus that this story comes from one of the 17 or so places in North America named after my ancestors. From the Chicago Tribune, Belleville, Illinois. Visitors to St. Clair County's courthouse are being put on notice that bringing drugs into the building isn't a bright idea. 3 people have been arrested at the Belleville courthouse in less than a week after they allegedly were found to be carrying drugs at a security checkpoint. Sheriff's officials say bailiff Josh P. arrested a man Monday who was carrying marijuana in one of his pockets. The man was charged with misdemeanor marijuana possession. Last Wednesday, P. nabbed a man who swallowed a bag of suspected cocaine he refused to turn over to the bailiff. That man was charged with obstructing a peace officer. The next day, P. arrested another man at the checkpoint who was also carrying marijuana. The Marijuana Express card. Don't leave home with it. And for crying out loud, don't take it to court with you. Next week, Damon Stoudemire and Michael Vick explain why marijuana and airports usually don't mix. Canadian restaurant won't fight medical marijuana user. From the Star in Ontario, Canada. A Burlington businessman brought to the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal after he told a medical marijuana user not to light up in front of his family restaurant has given up fighting the complaint because he couldn't afford the legal fees. Ted Kindos, owner of Gator Ted's Tap and Grill, said yesterday after reaching a settlement, quote, "The financial burden, the burden on me and my family, was too much," end quote. Kindos said his lawyer told him it would cost up to $60,000 to continue fighting the complaint. It was scheduled for 8 days of hearings at the Human Rights Tribunal beginning yesterday. Kindos said he has already spent $20,000. Steve Gibson, a longtime customer, complained to the Ontario Human Rights Commission in 2005 after Kindos told him to leave the premises for smoking marijuana in the doorway of the restaurant at Burlington Heights Plaza. Gibson said, quote, "The principle I was fighting for was to be able to have a quality of life and to be able to go out without being stuck at home because I need my medical marijuana." He added that he was pleased with the settlement. Although the Commission's lawyers do not represent the complainants, their positions are often similar, said Commission spokesperson Jeff Poirier. Poirier said, quote, "For the Commission, this case is about being treated the same as other smokers. This is a smoker with a disability who uses medicinal marijuana that's legally prescribed to him, so he's seeking access to the designated smoking area," end quote. Kindos said he originally refused to allow Gibson to smoke marijuana in the smoking room of the restaurant. Gibson then began smoking in front of the restaurant, and patrons complained of the smell, said Kindos. These cases are gaining ground in Canada and the 12 U.S. medical marijuana states. If marijuana is to be treated the same as other medicines, then we have to address the question of how patients are to use their medicine outside of their home. In many states, smoking anything in or near a public building is absolutely forbidden. But in this case, the restaurant made an allowance for tobacco smokers to be able to smoke in a designated area. So if patrons have the right to smoke tobacco for no medical purpose, indeed to the detriment of their own health and the health of others through secondhand smoke, then it's hard to understand banning a medical cannabis smoker in the same area. The only consideration would be a moral judgment that smoking cannabis is wrong, which seemed to be the situation here. Kindos alleged that the patrons of his restaurant didn't want their children exposed to the smell of cannabis. Marijuana may up heart attack, stroke risk. From Reuters. Heavy marijuana use can boost blood levels of a particular protein, perhaps raising a person's risk of a heart attack or stroke, U.S. government researchers said on Tuesday. Levels of a protein were found to be 30% higher in the marijuana users compared to the others. This specific protein is involved in the body's metabolism of triglycerides, a type of fat found in the blood, and higher levels of this protein cause increased levels of triglycerides. High levels of triglycerides can contribute to hardening of the arteries or thickening of the artery walls, raising the risk of stroke, heart attack, and heart disease. The study did not look at whether the heavy marijuana users actually had heart disease. The marijuana users in the study averaged smoking 78 to 350 marijuana cigarettes per week, based on self-reported drug history, the researchers said. The researchers said the active ingredient in marijuana, known as THC, seems to overstimulate marijuana receptors in the liver, leading to overproduction of the protein. They said higher levels of the protein in marijuana users could raise future risk for cardiac abnormalities, blood flow problems, heart attack, and stroke. Yet still, note that the study doesn't check to see if the heavy marijuana users actually do have heart disease. The research done on the health effects of even heavy marijuana smokers show little if any difference between cannabis users and their non-using counterparts, and some studies even show a benefit from cannabis in treating hypertension. However, overeating, drinking alcohol, and smoking tobacco are proven to have deleterious effects on the heart and on health. I doubt we're going to see any major effort to arrest the users of those substances, though. Stay tuned, because later on in the podcast here, we'll be speaking with Bruce Merkin from the Marijuana Policy Project, who's got all sorts of interesting things to point out about this study.
Marijuana is an addictive drug which produces in its users insanity, criminality, and death.
Marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind.
If the hideous monster Frankenstein came face to face with the monster of marijuana, he would drop dead from fright.
Congressman Brad Ellsworth's Got Reefer Madness. A devoted stash listener forwarded me a response he received after contacting his congressman, Brad Ellsworth, of Indiana's 8th District. What impresses me most is Ellsworth's ability to fit so much reefer madness into so few sentences.
Thank you for contacting me to share your views on marijuana. I appreciate your comments, and I welcome this opportunity to share my thoughts. According to a 2005 National Survey on Drug Use and Health, marijuana remains the most commonly used illicit drug in the United States. While marijuana use is generally unhealthy and has negative social repercussions, it also serves as a gateway drug to more dangerous substance abuse. For these reasons, I remain concerned about the prevalence of drug abuse in our culture and the harmful consequences that are the result of this behavior. As a career law enforcement officer, I saw firsthand the devastating effects that illicit drug use can have on both individuals and communities. While a member of the Vandenberg County Sheriff's Office, I initiated the Drug Abuse Resistance Effort Program, or DARE, to make children aware of the dangers posed by drug use. I made fighting drugs a top priority within the department, and I will continue to do so in the United States Congress. Currently, no legislation regarding the legalization of non-medicinal marijuana has been introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives. If such legislation is introduced, I will not support it. Thanks again for taking the time to share your views with me. I need your input to make the best decisions possible, so please stay in touch.
Well then, Congressman, here's some input. As to your first point about marijuana being the most commonly used illicit drug in the United States, well, that's absolutely true. Cannabis is used at least once by 25 million people every year. That by itself means nothing besides the qualifier illicit being used to denigrate cannabis. Over 162 million people use alcohol each year, and over 71 million use tobacco each year, the use of both being far more unhealthy and with far more negative social repercussions than cannabis. Number 2. While inhaling the smoke of burning vegetable matter is never healthy, and it can be avoided by using edibles or vaporization, it's a stretch to call cannabis smoking unhealthy. Smokers may develop more respiratory difficulty than non-smokers, but far less than tobacco smokers. It does not contribute to cancer. There are some studies showing anti-tumoral properties from cannabis, as a matter of fact. It does not lead to schizophrenia. It does not kill your brain cells. It does not harm the fetus. It does not affect fertility. And while your short-term memory is affected while you're high, it wears off, and afterwards there is no effect on thinking or memory. As to the negative social repercussions, absolutely true. There are social repercussions like losing your college aid, losing a job, losing your possessions, going to prison, losing your right to vote, and many more. But cannabis isn't causing those social repercussions. Laws prohibiting cannabis cause those social repercussions. As far as a gateway drug, once and for all, can we say it together? There is no gateway effect from marijuana. This logical fallacy is based on the idea that most heroin, coke, or meth users first used marijuana, so if you smoke pot, you'll naturally move on to those other drugs. But when you realize that there are 25 million annual pot smokers and only 6 million cocaine users, less than 2 million meth users, and less than 500,000 heroin users, you realize that most people who smoke weed only smoke weed. Less than 1 out of 100 marijuana users ever tries cocaine or heroin. Alcohol and cigarette use are actually more prevalent precursors of illicit drug use than cannabis. The only thing cannabis and heroin have in common is that they are both considered Schedule I drugs. The only gateway is the black market drug dealer who sells all the illegal substances. As far as the prevalence of drug abuse in our culture and the harmful consequences, this is the way most of these anti-cannabis screeds go. They start by demonizing cannabis, but then go on to merge cannabis use with all the other drug abuse. You know, it's the old leaf and line and needle graphic that highlights a drug bust on the evening news. It's why the gateway is so important in their argument, Most people know that marijuana isn't the demon weed it's made out to be, but most people also know of the true harms of cocaine, meth, or heroin abuse. So it's very important that they all be illicit drugs, and we erase the distinctions between them. As for this officer starting up the DARE program in his county, the DARE program has been shown time and again to be ineffective at preventing teen drug use, a waste of money, and perhaps counterproductive in that it may increase the prevalence of drug use by suburban kids. Finally, as far as non-medicinal marijuana legislation in the House, I guess he wasn't aware of Barney Frank's H.R. 5843, the bill that would legalize the possession of up to 100 grams of non-medical marijuana by adults. Guess it doesn't matter since he won't be supporting it. But isn't it nice to know that our elected officials make cannabis policy guided by facts and reason?
Hello, I'm Paul Stanford from the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation, or THCF. Medical marijuana is legal in 12 states today, and THCF has medical clinics in 6 of those states. Our physicians help qualified patients obtain an authorization for medical marijuana in their state. Patients are eligible for medical marijuana with a history of either severe chronic pain and or nausea, cancer, AIDS or HIV, hepatitis, glaucoma, seizure disorders like epilepsy, chronic muscle spasms as in multiple sclerosis or asthma, neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, and gastrointestinal disorders like IBS or Crohn's disease. If you or someone you know has one of these conditions, our doctors will help them obtain a permit for medical marijuana. THCF Medical Clinics has offices in Washington State, Oregon, Colorado, Nevada, Hawaii, and California. Call 1-800-723-0188 or go to the web at www.hemp.org or 1-800-723-0188.
Tuesday is our look at your government at work here at the Audio Stash. While the inevitable re-legalization of cannabis hemp will have to happen at the federal level, the steps leading to that destination take place at the state and municipal levels. We focus in on the initiatives, bills, and amendments regarding cannabis across all 50 states, and what activists like you are doing to enact a positive reform to our cruel and outdated marijuana laws. If you're working hard to make an impact in your city and state, please email us at stash@normal.org and let's share your local efforts with the worldwide cannabis community. Together, we can affect our government at work.
Pollution rises high into the sky. How can we still deny the truth?
Well, we're joined now by the director of Illinois NORML, Dan Lynn, who's joining us by telephone today. Thanks for being on the Daily Audio Stash.
It's always a pleasure, Russ.
Wanted to talk to you about this medical marijuana bill that you have in Illinois. We had talked back in February about this bill, but now the bill has been amended due to the concerns of law enforcement, and I thought maybe you could give our listeners a good idea what has happened now, what the concerns of law enforcement were, and what they've done to change this bill.
Well, law enforcement was concerned that the bill wasn't tight enough, that there were loopholes and chances of abuse within the system. And the senator who sponsored the legislation met with the law enforcement officers and addressed their concerns. And now the bill has been amended, in my opinion, dramatically from its original content. But hopefully with these amendments that we can pass this legislation and move forward from there.
So what are some of the new restrictions to the bill that law enforcement managed to add?
Well, the biggest restrictions is that the amount of patients throughout the state has been capped at 1,200, whereas the original bill had an unlimited amount of patients just as long as their doctors recommended cannabis to them. Now there's only going to be 1,200 throughout the state, and the program is actually just a 3-year pilot program, whereas before it would have been until they repealed the law itself. Now it has what's called a sunset clause, So they can have this program enacted for 3 years, and after 3 years they can go and see if it's being abused or what needs to be changed or if they want to get rid of it altogether.
All right, so that is going to be limited to 1,200 patients. And in Illinois, we're talking about a state with, about 13 million people in the state, so that's a very small number.
Yeah, when I originally heard the amendments and found out that it was going to be limited to 1,200, I was extremely upset. I had a few patients contact me, emotionally upset about it. And after talking with other people behind the scenes, what I've come to realize is that 1,200 number is probably just an arbitrary number, and if we had that filled up, the next patient, that 1201 or 1202 patient, could probably sue the Department of Public Health and get their medicine legal for them. It's just kind of a measure to get this bill passed, and then when it's passed, we can change it to be more effective and appropriate for the amount of people in the state. Because, 1,200 people is nothing for, the entire city of Chicago plus the state of Illinois.
Absolutely. And I think you've got a good point there. Is to be some sort of equal protection violation there. I mean, cancer patient number 1199 isn't legally any different than cancer patient number 1201, but to deny one based on an arbitrary number, that just seems, anti-American to me.
Yeah, and it's just something that I think the sponsor wanted to put in there so that this bill would be as soft as possible for people to vote in favor of it. There was a lot of discussion at the hearings about how many patients there are in California. They think that there's widespread abuse in that program, so this is kind of a safeguard so that those that are concerned that this is going to be de facto legalization is actually not true.
So are there any other limitations or restrictions that they've added to the bill that makes it tighter than it was before?
Yeah, they limited the amount of plants and cannabis that patients can have. Originally it was 8 plants and 2.5 ounces. That has been downsized to 7 plants and 2 ounces. But at the same time, that's similar to the 1,200 patients. I think that once when we get this bill passed, we can go to the Department of Public Health, and they have what's called a 60-day supply, and we can try and boost that number up if we think that that's what's appropriate.
So now that you have these new amendments that have been added by law enforcement, do you feel that the chances of the bill passing are much greater than they were before?
Extremely. I mean, we thought that we had a good bill back when it was introduced, and we thought we had good chances of getting it passed because we were only about 4 votes short last year. Now that this bill has been amended, it's like a softball piece of legislation, in my opinion, that it would be extremely hard for these politicians and legislators not to vote in favor of it because it is just limited to 1,200 patients. It's just for 3 years. And after 3 years, if they think that this is a horrible program that's being widely abused, they can get rid of it and scrap it. So there's all those fears that we've come across in the public hearings and the newspapers have kind of been calmed by these amendments now. And the opposition that we originally faced with law enforcement, they're not necessarily in favor of this bill, but they're not going to be lobbying against it, which was the case just a few months ago before we had these amendments.
Well, I have a feeling when you get this bill passed that those 1,200 patient slots are going to get filled very quickly. Just doing some quick preliminary research on this story, I accessed the Illinois cancer database, and it turns out that you guys have something around the range of 17,000 cancer patients diagnosed every year, and I imagine that's one of the conditions considered under your law.
Yes, that is still listed as a condition that qualifies. And, yeah, I think those 1,200 patient slots are going to fill up extremely quick. And then we're going to have patients who are upset that this program is just limited to 1,200, and then a class action lawsuit or just some civil litigation might thereafter.
Are there any differences in the conditions in the Illinois bill as compared to some of the other states? I know, like in California, they're the one state that does allow for any, they're probably the most liberal because they allow for any condition for which a doctor feels cannabis will be useful. Some of the other states, such as Oregon or New Mexico, will enumerate the exact conditions that are available for medical marijuana to be recommended. Does the Illinois bill have something similar, and are the conditions similar?
Yes, there are specific conditions listed. It's pretty much HIV/AIDS, cancer, glaucoma, multiple sclerosis, muscle spasms. The biggest thing that has been omitted due to these amendments is chronic pain. And that's where states like California and others have a lot of patients qualify because they're just experiencing chronic pain. And unfortunately, one of the amendments was to scrap that condition of chronic pain as being qualifying for this program.
I see. Yeah, in most of the medical marijuana states, we find the large majority of the patients that qualify are qualifying under chronic pain. So that would make some sense as to why they wanted to limit that from their point of view, of course. Is there a mechanism by which the patient community or the medical community can lobby for conditions like chronic pain or maybe even post-traumatic stress or others to be added into the Illinois law once it passes?
Yeah, I think as soon as the law passes, they can go to the Department of Public Health, who's going to be administering the medical marijuana pilot program, and they can have the Department of Public Health add those conditions as needed. And I would imagine that it would just be the patients having their doctors contact the Department of Public Health, and the Department of Public Health then issuing an allowance for that condition.
I see. Well, it's a step in the right direction. It may not be as far as we'd want a medical marijuana bill to go, but, considering this would be the first medical marijuana state in the Midwest, perhaps baby steps are in order here just to get the bill passed, like you say, and then we can work to make the bill better.
Yeah, and like I said, we were really close last year, and we started off this year strong, a very aggressive bill, and now we've softened it up so that these legislators almost have no reason not to support it, because we've gone to the opposition and tried to calm their fears and address their concerns.
Well, good work on the lobbying front there in Illinois. Dan Lynn is the executive director of Illinois NORML. You can reach them on the internet at illinoisnormal.org. We'll have links to that up at our blog at stash.normal.org. And Dan, thanks for joining us again today.
Thank you, Russ.
Hello, I'm Casper Leach, host of Time for Him. When our politicians passed the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937, the citizens of the United States had no idea that a new civil war had begun. Now, after more than 7 decades of this war's escalation and spending well over $1 trillion of taxpayers' money, the result has been an arrest record of more than 37 million brothers and sisters for nonviolent drug offenses. Every year, we choose to continue this war. We do so at the cost of well over $69 billion. Add to this, we are building prisons faster than we are building schools. In fact, the prison industry is now one of the fastest growing industries in the United States. We must end this civil war. We can with your help. Please join LEAP, the Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and become part of the solution to ending the war on drugs. Go to leap.cc and find out how to become a member.
Here at the NORML Daily Audio Stash, we work hard to change our nation's marijuana laws through education and discussion. But we also take the time to relax and unwind with an eclectic mix of pod-safe music from many independent artists. We look for music that speaks to the growing truth about cannabis, or music that speaks to broader themes of freedom, liberty, social justice, equality, and protest. To find out more about the artists and download the music you hear on this podcast, just log on to stash.normal.org. And if you'd like to get your music heard by the online cannabis community, just send us an email at stash@normal.org. All right, we invite a true ganja man to today's stash with Rocker T and his Toker-inspired tune, True Ganja Man. Rocker T grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and has lived in San Francisco and Amsterdam, and currently calls Oakland, California his home base. Rocker T's music is reggae and dancehall mixed up into a hot Rasta blend. He has played in some of the greatest venues around, including Amsterdam's Cannabis Cup, San Francisco's Golden Gate Park, the Fillmore, the LA House of Blues, the Wetlands in New York City, Reggae on the River, and he is a regular fixture at the yearly Rainbow Family gatherings. Today's track is a fan favorite and even has an audio cameo in a scene from the stoner classic film Next Friday. This track is from his new album, If You Love Love, Show You Love. Find out more about Rocker T, his philosophy, and his music at rocker-t.com. Also, check out the website stash.normal.org. We've got a link to the download of this song on MP3. It's Rocker T with True Ganja Man.
Speaking for the legalization of marijuana. Awo, 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 awa, awa, sata ama sagana la la Gabriel alam, madani alam. Me chant, me chant, me chant, me chant. Oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Take a look in Genesis and me say book number 1. Can make the herb seed for the human. It start way back on from creation. That was the time when the weed come from. So can make the herb give it unto Adam. That man they lose, that's how make it find Abraham. Old man Moses climb on Zion. How will they find the seed in the grave of Solomon? Fireman know it is a weed of wisdom. Some communion for inspiration. I know they want to take me chalice out of me and them fight against long time tradition. Babylon is a man with wicked intention. All Babylon they mean a malfunction. A Rasta man is a conscious man. Plant a seed and start a weed revolution, man. Oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. They find the cure for cancer in a Mariana. And if you're sick and you not fit, you want to link the chalwa. Gabriel alamla, Sata amasagana. Peace and love, give thanks and praise before you burn the ganja. That is the blessing from Almighty Jaja. And who bring the message, the liquor rocker. Me born and me grow as a New Yorker. But when me go round the world, they say me from America. Look in me left pocket, find a bag of ganja. Look in the same pocket, I find me lighter. Look in the next pocket, $1.25. Bring me a orange juice, I'm too high for liquor. But you me got the boom type of sense in me, and if you have a little hash, I mix it together. You pass me the herb and the Dutch master. I wake up on the sense in me up on the street corner. So oh, says I feel Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Me talking some roots rock and reality. And up on the mic now the one rockety. Me born and me grow in a New York City. Me come fit teach the people love and unity. It's every type of man them we smoke sense. The young and the middle and the elderly. The rich man and the man we living in a poverty. Some them are belly full and some them are hungry. So when we get together in a we community, we take a one jar for all our family and pass it round the cipher 1, 2, 3 degrees. I know you got to bless that. You want it done properly. The healing of the nation certainly. You light it and you pass it and you feel highway. Some them a follow me, some them a disagree. Nobody could have ever take away my sensity. Oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Awo, awo, awa, awa. It's got be the masagan, sata amasagan, ala amlak, madani alam, me chant. Oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Come on, oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Come on, oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Come on, oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Puff it up, smoke it up, y'all.
It's tough talking to kids about marijuana, especially if you might be a parent who dabbled a time or two in your youth. So to help you out, get your copy of Dr. Mitch Earlywine's latest book, A Parent's Guide to Marijuana. Dr. Earlywine is an associate professor of psychology at the State University of New York at Albany and an expert on the studies concerning marijuana, its effect on health and society, and the methodology behind the statistics. He is a frequent guest here on our daily audio stash. Dr. Earlywine lays it all out without the propaganda and scare tactics that parents know won't work with teenagers. He presents a rational understanding of cannabis, what it is and what it isn't, and why kids shouldn't be using marijuana. You can order today through Amazon.com or check our links at our blog, stash.normal.org. We're speaking with the Director of Communications for the Marijuana Policy Project. Bruce Merkin joins us by telephone. Welcome back to the Daily Audio Stash, Bruce.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, I see that we've got this terrible, terrible report that's just been hyped. It's coming up through U.S. News and World Report and a few other outlets that says marijuana may up the risk of heart attacks and strokes based on some study that says it raises a certain type of protein. Have you reviewed this study, and what do we have to say about this one?
Well, I think what you can say is that there's a great deal less here than meets the eye, particularly if you're reading some of those headlines. What they did is they looked at about 18 very heavy marijuana users, people who were smoking. The low end was 78 joints a week, more than 11 joints a day. That was the low end. The heavier users were twice that much. And what they found was that these folks did, on average, have higher levels of certain chemicals in the blood, which in other studies, in other situations, seem to be connected to higher risk of heart disease. Now, a couple of problems with this is, number one, they didn't control for other drug use. They didn't include in the study people who had diagnosable dependence or abuse of other substances, but you could be a relatively frequent, say, methamphetamine user and have been in this study as long as you didn't actually have it in your system at the time they drew your blood. So we don't really know if there may have been other things involved that could have affected these readings. The other thing, which they don't really deal with in the study at all, is that there isn't any evidence that people who use marijuana have higher rates of heart attacks or strokes, or are more likely to die younger, live less long, etc. And if marijuana use was a significant cause of heart disease, you'd see bodies, you know. We know, according to government surveys, that at least 15 million Americans acknowledge using marijuana in the last month. We're talking about a large population of folks. If it was causing people to drop dead of heart attacks, we'd know it.
That's one of the responses I often have is if marijuana was as bad as they say it was, we would have seen some sort of major spike in all of these health factors after the summer of love, wouldn't we?
Well, exactly. And you know, one of the things they talk about in this study is that this the chemical that they found at elevated levels in the blood interferes with the breakdown of a type of fat called triglycerides. High triglyceride levels can be a risk factor for heart disease. But the patients in this study did not have significantly elevated triglyceride levels. It was a little bit of a trend, but not enough to really mean anything. So they really didn't show any sort of concrete effect in the real world at all. It's one of those sort of laboratory marker findings that may or may not be a clue to anything in the real world.
Right. It reminds me a little bit of before Dr. Tashkin took up his studies on marijuana and cancer, how people would theorize because of the carcinogens in marijuana smoke, it must lead to more cancer. But then when he actually did the study, he found other features of marijuana that helped to suppress the incidences of cancer. And as you point out, we didn't see any bodies.
Well, exactly. And of course, there is a long history in medicine of focusing on one element that seems to be important and then discovering later that there's other things we didn't know about that are just as important that change things. For example, when I was a kid, and I'm old enough to have, I was graduating from college when Jimmy Carter was president. The standard health advice was definitely avoid butter, use margarine, it's healthier. The margarines of that era were all loaded with trans fats, which we now know are a major risk factor for heart disease. They hadn't even been identified then.
Right.
So, in fact, what seemed like health advice circa 1972 was probably really unhealthy advice, because we didn't know the other pieces of the puzzle. And that could very well be what's going on here. There may, this one particular blood chemical may be increased. There may be other stuff going on that causes it not to be a problem. If it was a problem, I think by now we'd have seen evidence of higher rates of heart attacks and other problems.
I would think so as well. And to look at the other aspect of this that you pointed out about the sample of these people in the study that were these heavy users, the study says the low end was 78 joints per week, they say, and then up to 350 joints per week based on a self-reported drug history. Now, I just went to the federal government and figured out what they call a joint, and based on some of their studies, it's about 3/4 of a gram. When you do the math on that, that ends up to being about 2 to 9 ounces of marijuana per week for these people. What kind of level of population would that represent in the cannabis community out there?
Well, I think to all indications, this is a very tiny segment of the marijuana using community. And, I think it's interesting. We're talking about people who were essentially stoned all the time. Now, compare that to, say, an alcoholic who's drunk all the time. The harm that level of alcohol use is going to do you would be huge. It would be obvious. It would be visible in liver damage, brain damage, drastically reduced life expectancy. The fact that all they can find in these very heavy marijuana users seems to be chemical tests that may or may not show anything is actually pretty remarkable.
Yes, it's definitely one of the safer substances to use out there, especially when we're considering or comparing it to tobacco or alcohol, which of course are perfectly legal in this country.
Well, indeed. Now, of course, I always say that no drug is completely without risks, and a certain amount of common sense is advised. One thing we do know about marijuana is it can elevate your heart rate a bit. If you're somebody who's had some serious heart problems, a certain amount of caution is required. Just like caution is required as far as things like operating machinery or driving a car. You do have to expect people to use common sense, but I think the picture clearly is that if used moderately and responsibly, marijuana is a great deal safer than an awful lot of legal drugs that are out there.
Well, let's leave it at that, and we'll just remember that when you see these studies and these headlines coming out in the news, always take them with a bit of a grain of salt, and stay tuned to the Daily Audio Stash. We'll get the experts online to make sure you get the real facts. This has been Bruce Merkin, who's the Director of Communications for the Marijuana Policy Project in Washington, D.C. And Bruce, thanks again for joining us on the show.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you for downloading the NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. We are produced by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. Our executive producer is Alan St. Pierre. Our deputy director is Paul Armentano. Our webmaster is Brian Judy. And web production is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. As always, you can catch up on the latest information about marijuana at www.norml.org. And you can interact and download from our Audio Stash blog at stash.norml.org. For everyone here at NORML, I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville, hoping all your harvests are bountiful and your encounters with law enforcement are non-existent. We leave you today with another one of our cannabis quotes. This one comes from a study published by Kaiser Permanente back in 1997, which said, quote, relatively few adverse clinical effects from the chronic use of marijuana have been documented in humans. However, the criminalization of marijuana use may itself be a health hazard, since it may expose the users to violence and criminal activity." End quote. Or as Jack Harrer is fond of saying, nobody ever died from marijuana that wasn't shot by a dealer or a cop. I'm Radical Russ, reminding you to stay safe out there, everyone, until we can effect the end of adult marijuana prohibition. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.